right, class, today we're going to be doing the fourth lesson in evolution. We've already done the origin of life, fossil evidence of change, and Darwin's theory of natural selection. So we're going to be diving a little bit deeper now, going through all of the evidence of evolution. So, essential questions. How do fossils provide evidence of evolution? How does morphology provide evidence of evolution? And how does biochemistry provide evidence of evolution? Review vocabulary, we have fossils. New vocabulary: derived trait, ancestral trait, homologous structure, vestigial structure, analogous structure, embryo, biogeography, fitness, camouflage, and mimicry. And I'll go through those throughout this lesson. So first, let's talk about what shaped Darwin's thinking so that he was in a position to be able to come up with a theory of natural selection and thereby leading the way for the theory of evolution. First off, we had James Hutton back in 1795. He had this radical idea that the Earth was more than a few thousand years old. He also was able to show that the forces of nature, like wind and water, were able to change the way the Earth's surface was shaped. So we get valleys from water coming through, mountains from the plates coming together, and things like that. Moving on to Charles Lyell, he was also working in geography. He was showing how things could be brought up and things could be torn down. So this is mountains and things like that. Basically how the earth could change over time. And Darwin was like, hey, if things that are not alive can do this, imagine what living things could do. They can do the same thing. So he was thinking about it. Lamarck, he had some interesting ideas. He said that things are going to tend towards perfection, and perfection being how they are right now. So he uses a giraffe as an example, that the perfection state is that they had a long neck, so they kept moving and stretching their necks until they had long necks. He also had the idea of use and disuse. So the birds flapped their wings, and eventually they had wings and they could fly. Uh, we know this is not true. No matter how much you flap your arms, you will not gain the ability to fly. He also thought there was an inheritance of acquired traits, and I'm going to talk about what the difference of derived and acquired traits are later, but basically this would be like if I dyed my hair blue, then I had a kid and my kid had blue hair, and we know that that's not how it works. Y'all still paying attention? All right, so here we have a picture of the original giraffe, and then it kept stretching and stretching and using its neck until it became what we see today. We know this is not the case. This is not how it happens, but this is what Lamarck thought. All right, so moving on to Malthus. Malthus, he was an economist. So he was talking about how populations changed and grew, mainly human population, through birth rate and the death rate. He was looking at that. So he was like, if there's not enough food, if there's not enough places for them to live, all of these things, then the death rate would increase and the birth rate would decrease. So Darwin started to think about this and to apply this to animals for natural selection. All right, so descent. You guys haven't had genetics yet, so I'm going to try and get you guys to an understanding without having had genetics. But descent means that it's going to come from an ancestor. So you descended from your great, 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 great grandparents. Okay, so, but we're talking about way longer of a descent than that. Okay, so common descent means that they have common ancestors. And then descent with modification means that things are going to change over time for the species. And eventually, with so much descent with modification, from the first to the last organism, we're going to get a different species. So if we're looking at these here, These are all descent with modification. So going from A to B, you don't see a lot of change. From B to C, not much change. C to D, not much change. If you keep going one step, there's not much change. There's hardly any change one to the other. Here, maybe a little more, but still not much change, not much change. And this is the modern day human. But if we look at the modern human and the first one, there's a lot of change. And even stepping back because my picture is blocking the first one, but you can see on your downloaded slides, there's a huge difference between the two. So it's those small gradual changes, and you don't see any changes until you look back at the original. There's a species, well, more than one species of birds, but it's a specific type of bird. They have them all around the world. And if you start in North America and then you start jumping through North America and then you jump to Europe, jump all the way around, from place to place, the birds can mate with each other and have offspring all the way around until you come to South America, where you've made the full loop around the world. And in South America, the one in North America and South America, they can't reproduce. They're different species. But every one, if you follow the linking around, each one can reproduce with the other one. But once you make that jump from beginning to end, now they're different species. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so the 5 things we're going to look at today is the fossil record, geographic distribution of living things, homologous body structures, similarities in early development, and comparative biochemistry. So first off, the fossil record, this is going to be the layers that show change. We talked about the fossil record already, but the big takeaway from this is fossils show modern species resembled the ancient species, and we saw that some species haven't changed much. Mainly like alligators, they've been around forever, and they haven't changed in the fossil record. But you can see here however you say that name, Glyptodon, I don't know. That's a crazy name. Anyway, it's an ancient ancestor of the armadillo. You can see that it looks like it, and you can tell that it's of that family, but it's not quite the same. It resembles, but it's different. Okay. All right. So this brings us to derived traits and ancestral traits. Ancestral traits are going to be passed on from the ancestors. So if you look at the common ancestor will have that trait also. A derived trait is going to be new, something that the ancestor didn't have. Okay, so if I'm looking at, I don't have a good example off top without showing you guys something. We'll talk about it in class. All right, so geographic distribution of living things. Similar environments have similar organisms. So you look here, we have all of these here. I think this one's a neutral rat. That one's a beaver. They're similar because they have similar environments. They're not the same, but they are similar. So distribution of plants and animals help them to evolve in certain patterns. And that's called biogeography. All right, homologous body structures. Homologous body structures are going to be structures that develop from the same embryonic tissue. That means that they have some type of genetic or ancestral lineage, but they have a different function. Okay, same ancestry, different function. Homologous structures, same ancestry, different function. So examples of that, we have the human arm, the cat, the whale, and the bat. So they come from the same ancestral tissues, but they're all going to have a different function. The human arm, we know what it does because you have one. The cat arm, that's going to be acting as a foot. The whale to swim, the bat to fly. So it's going to have different functions and different forms, but come from the same ancestral tissue. Okay? Vestigial organs, these are going to have no function in the mature adult of the species. but it's still there because there's no selective pressures to get rid of it. Snakes have, well, some of them have the bone joints and stuff to have legs, but it's a vestigial structure because we don't use it anymore, or they don't use it anymore. We have one, two, three different vestigial structures, one being the appendix. It's useless. We don't use it. It's only there to cause problems. Our tailbone is a vestigial structure. It's from the days of when our ancestors had a tail. Some people are still born with a tail. I've seen a person who can actually make it wiggle. And then there's this tendon in your wrist here. If you flex it like that, you can see it pop out. I don't know if you can see it popping out on mine. Some people have it, some people don't. It's a hangover from our ancestors who used to be in the trees. It helps you climb better. It's actually not strong enough in humans to actually be beneficial for anything, but it doesn't hurt us, so it doesn't go away. All right, analogous structures. These are going to have the same function, different ancestry. Okay, analogous, same function, different ancestry. Homologous, same ancestry, different function. Okay, that's the key difference between the two. So analogous structures are like the wings for a bird, a bat, and insects, so butterflies. They all are giving them the ability to fly, but they do not have a common ancestor. I mean, they do way back, but nothing that's going to be like gaining the wings that happened at different times past their common ancestor. So another one for that would be dolphins and sharks. They both have fins to swim, but it didn't come from common ancestry. It came from a common pressure of their environment. All right, similarities in early development. If we're looking at embryonic development, comparative embryology, when you have common ancestry, there's going to be common early development. So we see here all of these here. If presented with one by itself, you cannot tell me if it was human, bird, reptile, or fish, because there's common embryonic development for them. Which brings us to comparative biochemistry. Comparative biochemistry, this is going to actually look at the different amino acids, mainly cytochrome C. So if I'm looking at cytochrome C in humans, and then we're looking at the differences as we move away from humans in ancestry, humans and monkeys share like 90% of their DNA, but with this, it's pretty similar. As we go to pigs, we're still mammals, but we're getting further away. Ducks, getting further away. Turtles further. Fish even further. Insects pretty far away. And then you can see we only share 50% with plants. Okay? But as we get closer in ancestry, we have a closer metabolic structure. So a closer DNA structure. Even though we're looking at the amino acids are going to be the outward display of the DNA. And we'll talk more about that when we get to genetics. All right, adaptations. So let's talk about one thing, which is fitness. Fitness is going to be what makes an individual capable of surviving and therefore by reproducing. So fitness is not going to be the strongest. Even though you hear it's survival of the fittest. It's not survival of the strongest. It's the one that is going to have the most likelihood to survive, therefore reproduce. So if I'm looking at a really, really fast brown bunny and a little bit of a slower white bunny, but we're in the Arctic and all the snow is around, which one's going to get eaten? The brown bunny, because the lynx can see it and it will pick it and it can still run faster. No matter how fast the bunny is, the lynx can run faster. The only hope that the bunny has is being able to blend in and hide from the lynx. Okay, so natural selection is going to thrive off of this survival of the fittest. We'll talk more about that in class. All right, so these are different things that are going to give it a level of fitness. So I talked about camouflage already. That's where we had the bunny that's white with snow. It's camouflage. Mimicry, this is where it's going to mimic something that is harmful so that things leave it alone. So we see we have the coral snake here and the king snake here. Um, I grew up in the middle of the woods. We had a little saying, black and red, friend of Fred, red and yellow kill a fella. So you see here with the coral snake, the red and yellow touch. With the king snake, black separates the red and the yellow. Now, if you get that close to the snake, you're probably going to get bit anyway. Probably best bet is to not be around the snake. Anyway, if you see something in nature that is extremely bright and stands out, it's either venomous, poisonous, or mimicking something that is. Things don't stand out unless they can. So either it is venomous, poisonous, or mimicking something that is. All right, so there are some consequences to adaptations. Humans have a consequence of adaptation. When we stood up, our pelvis got more narrow. Therefore, we had to birth our babies earlier, otherwise, they get stuck in the birth canal. Uh, Also, our heads are bigger now because we have the big brain, which means that it has to come out earlier. Otherwise, it gets stuck in the birth canal. Therefore, we now have helpless babies. All of the rest of the animal kingdom, they have babies that stand up, walk around, and are fine. Ours are helpless for months. All right, so to summarize, individuals in nature differ from one another. The organism in nature are going to produce more offspring than can survive. The ones that don't survive probably will not reproduce, or they probably will die before they reproduce. Because we have more organisms than can survive, there's going to be some type of struggle for resources. Some organisms are going to have an advantage and some will have a disadvantage in this struggle for existence. The individuals that are best suited for the environment, therefore the fittest, will survive and reproduce the most successfully, thereby passing on their genetics. Therefore, species will change over time. The species alive today descended with modification from species that lived in the past, and all organisms on Earth are united into a single family tree of life by common descent. Okay, that's it for today. Sorry if it took too long. Please, if you have questions, put them in the discussion board.